The basic message is that we've got to figure out what the right architecture for copyright regulation in the 21st century is. And that means getting away from the models of the past, instead translating those objectives into a new technological environment. And I was encouraged to do that here because I think there's actually a bigger opportunity in countries like Sweden to think creatively about what the architecture of copyright law should look like than there is in countries like the United States, where we're very tied to particular industries that have a vision of copyright that was set in the 1970s.
What's the problem with today's copyright laws?
Well, I think today's copyright laws are trying to enforce a model of control that made sense in the analog age, but doesn't make sense in the digital age. They're trying to enforce a model of control that triggers copyright on the production of a copy, which in the world where copies are the exception makes sense, but in the world that we live in the digital age, where every single time you access culture or use culture, you produce a copy because that's how digital technologies function, doesn't make sense. So they have an objective, which is to perfect a system that was built for a different ecology. And I think we instead have to build a system for this ecology.
What will the copyright laws look like in, let's say, 10 years?
Well, my hope is that we have clear spaces marked that are exempt from the type of regulation of copyright law because they don't need it, because they're forms of creativity that don't depend upon the commercial marketplace to succeed in that way. And we have a system designed to keep clear the rights that need to be accounted for so that there's no uncertainty about who owns what and what rights I have to pay for, so that it becomes simpler to obey the law as you're creating and producing creativity.
You're one of the founders of the Creative Commons.
Right.
Briefly, what is it?
So Creative Commons is a nonprofit aiming at providing authors and creators with tools that they can use to mark the freedom they want their creative work to carry. So that you can say, you're free to share this, or you're free to make a remix of this, but here are the restrictions that I might say. I might say only for non-commercial purposes, for example. So it makes it simpler for people to share work within the context of the copyright regime than it is right now. It's a pretty simple idea against the background of the way copyright functions. So copyright presumptively says no to everything, and we have a set of standard licenses that are saying yes to a certain class of things, so that we simplify the process of enabling follow-on creativity because the licenses have made that clear. Well, there's a impact which is just it's made the debate clear that there isn't a simple binary between those who support copyright and those who oppose it. There's a wide space in the middle of people who are creating in ways that are innovative, but want their creativity shared. And more fundamentally, there are certain businesses, certain spaces where it's become an essential part of the environment. So, for example, in the context of remix music, in the DNA of practically every major commercial remix site is Creative Commons music, because it's so simple to use that in the context of this type of creativity. So it's been practically pretty significant, and conceptually, I think, enormously significant in just pushing beyond the simple framework that had existed before.
Some people have called you a communist. Why?
Well, I think that there's an indiscriminate, I think that people often just don't want to pay enough attention to figure out what's going on here. They frame the world as those who oppose copyright or those who support it. And it's taken a long time to get people to recognize the world isn't so simply divided. I've made the point today in my speech that I am against abolitionism in copyright, and I think that we need copyright to encourage important forms of creativity. But that's not to say that we need the system of copyright that our fathers produced. We need a different system that makes sense in this technology that's different from the one that made sense before.
How far has the politician listened to you? Are they about to change laws?
Not so much in the United States. Around the world, much more significantly. The developing world, Brazil, is very attuned to these issues and very sophisticated in their response. And I think, there are places in Europe, Northern Europe in particular, where I think this is a much more likely debate to be won, because I think it's a structure of sanity to the policy making that doesn't quite exist in the United States.